Welcome to Your Future Starts Now, the go-to podcast for extraordinary women who are ready to step into their next chapter with authentic confidence. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua, empowerment coach, motivational speaker, children's book author, and girl mom. Whether you're a corporate powerhouse or an entrepreneur, this show is designed for you. Your Future Starts Now is more than just a podcast. It's a movement towards rewriting the rules of success for high-achieving women. Are you ready to get unstuck and step into your next chapter? If so, you're exactly where you need to be. Your future starts now. Welcome to Your Future Starts Now. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua. I want to thank you for tuning in today. I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Cree Scott. Dr. Scott is the founder and CEO of Serenity Consulting. With over 20 years in psychology and 14 years in leadership development, she is an ICF certified coach and a member of the Forbes Coaches Council and the HBR Advisory Council. Dr. Scott is passionate about helping leaders unlock their full potential. Through Serenity Consulting, Dr. Scott delivers transformative, human-centered leadership development workshops, team building sessions, and consulting services within the area of DEI and employee well-being. Her work utilizes evidence-based techniques to translate complex concepts into practical strategies. With a strengths-based coaching approach rooted in cognitive, behavioral, and positive psychology, she empowers leaders to overcome self-limiting beliefs and achieve meaningful personal and professional growth. Dr. Scott, so excited to have you join us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
This is going to be a great episode. So today we are talking about leadership, as you may have guessed, and specifically connection in leadership, which is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Before we jump into the good stuff, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to the work that you're doing today.
Oh, wow. That's a big question about what led me to the work, but I'll start with my background. So I am by trade a clinical psychologist, and I was practicing as a psychologist for several years until I was approached to do consulting. And I started in the consulting field in around 2010. I did not know what I was doing because I came from a clinical background, but I feel like I learned pretty quickly. I'm not sure what they might say. And so I started doing client service for the Department of Defense and really loved it. I ended up working at two different consulting firms, my last one being Deloitte. And while I was at Deloitte, I actually ended up going into leadership development again. Just by happenstance, it was something that I didn't know a lot about when I got into it. But then when I finally discovered that it was there, I absolutely loved it. So it was something that became a passion of mine in terms of helping leaders through psychological concepts and through my theorized way of kind of approaching most of the people that I work with, which is cognitive behavioral psychology and positive psychology mixed. And yeah, it's been really a great journey so far. I ended up leaving Deloitte at the end of 2021. And then I ended up going and starting my own business again by happenstance. It wasn't something that I had planned on doing. It was just, I wanted to kind of figure out what was next for me. And since I have been in my own business, I've been in a lot of different places when it comes to the type of work that I do. I think always I will be the consummate consultant, if you will. So I do a lot of thought partnerships and a lot of perspective building and things of that sort, strategy sessions sometimes. But the work that I love doing the most is facilitation and executive coaching.
I really love the work that you're doing, and it is so needed. And just appreciate, the energy and the passion that you bring to it, because it is so needed in this world.
Yes, especially now, right?
Especially now. And so I'm excited to jump into it. So in the work that you do, tell us just a little bit about what are some of the most common challenges you're seeing for leaders in today's environment, and then maybe specifically what you're seeing because our audience is high achieving women.
Yes.
If there's any distinction that you're seeing with women in leadership.
Yeah. I mean, I would say just across the board that the workplace is very different than what it was even when I was in the workforce, right? Like I consider myself a business owner still in the workforce, but not in the traditional sense. And so one of the biggest things that I'm seeing is that people are losing that level of engagement that they used to have. I think everyone is kind of afraid of what's going to happen next. And the level of uncertainty is growing at a much more rapid pace than it was even during COVID, because now we have AI and it's going faster than we can keep up. And we're concerned about losing our jobs. And what does that mean? And how do I learn to use AI so that I can stay relevant and all of those things? So I would say that's probably like the number one thing of how do I stay engaged through the anxiety and fear that I have. And that's really hard because when you have anxiety and fear, your irrational brain starts to kick in. And so engagement is a little challenging to be fully present because your cognitive brain is just not on all the way. So I think that, or the more rational side of yourself, I should say. So I think that that's probably the number one thing. A second thing is that it's hard to stay connected because we're so divided. I think that if you would have even asked me this question like last year, I would have kind of paused before I would have said this. But I will tell you that the whole landscape of, the political landscape has divided a lot of people in terms of where things are going and how people are deciding to do things. And when I say people, I really mean organizations and the leaders within those organizations. So I have just seen a lot of people worried about like, I thought that I had this, I was going to be doing this. And now what I'm hearing is that we're pivoting. We're not going to do that anymore, or we need to call it something different. So there's just, with AI and the political landscape, there's a lot of difficulty in terms of people really feeling engaged and connected to one another and the work that they're doing as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, we know change is a constant. We know that it's not going anywhere. And it just feels like we're in another one of those transitional periods where companies are trying to figure things out.
Absolutely. And for good reason, right? Like they need to make sure that they are not only staying relevant in their industry, but they also need to make sure they're taking care of their employees. And sometimes it may feel like those two things are at odds, even though my hope is that they will see that, humans first, right? Like hopefully.
Yeah, I think the employment or the well-being, the engagement, are still front and center, top priorities, or should be at least. But then it's also about what are the corporate values, right? That you are going to lead with. And I think if people are not clear on that, then everything gets a little bit clouded. So I think it is important for people to really know what their compass is.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. So in the women I work with, often I'll tell you, and I'm sure you see it as well, I see a lot of women, regardless of title, salary level, still struggle with, unfortunately, the imposter syndrome, the self-doubt. I'm curious as to what you see as some of the most common limiting beliefs that you see in leaders and, how maybe we can start to overcome some of that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about imposter syndrome is that people do not truly believe that they earned their way to, their right to be where they are. So when you have that mindset or that narrative in the back of your head about, oh, I got here because of this thing and not because of the hard work that I have done, it becomes very hard to stay calm and focused on what's in front of you because your mind is really being taken elsewhere. So I would say that the biggest thing that I'm seeing amongst specifically women is that there's a lot of anxiety that comes with the landscape of staying where they are and even excelling to that next level. So there becomes this, if you will, of if I don't keep moving at this pace, I'm going to get behind or I'm going to get left behind. And there is this, sense of frenetic energy, if you will, of spinning the wheels. And sometimes it is unproductive. Sometimes it is, we know that we need stress, right? Stress motivates. And we know that if we had zero stress, then we wouldn't be here, right? Like, so we know that there is a need for stress, but the levels in which I'm seeing it in my coaching clients in particular is off the charts. And there's also, because I think generally speaking, and this is a huge stereotype, so please, if someone doesn't fit into this category, please forgive me, but I think that women in general are just more nurturers and we are the people who hold community, right? Like we are the glue of communities most of the time. And so when you have that work life and then you have family, community, and all the other things that kind of holds it together, you become overworked and underappreciated sometimes. And I think that sometimes we don't know how to ask for help because we have convinced ourselves that asking for help is being helpless. And those two things are very different. And we need to, worry, we need to figure out how to reframe our narrative so that we can get the help that we need by also making sure that we are reaching our goals and achieving all of the success that we're looking for.
I love the way you just described the feelings that pretty much every working woman in America is feeling. I think it was just so eloquently and beautifully stated. Biologically, I think you're right. There's some wiring there of us being the nurturer and the caretaker for most of us, many of us, a lot of us. And to your point, we become the rock.
Yes.
Right. And that's a lot of pressure. And then so we feel like we can't let anyone see us.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. And there's a lot of conditioning in there as well. I can tell you from my own experience, I went through a really bad bout of burnout in my corporate world. 2018, I was having heart palpitations and I was just, a complete mess. All the physical, manifestations of unrelenting, chronic stress and burnout. But what I will say is one of the things that I think we need to normalize is that asking for help and recognizing that we were never meant to carry it all. But somehow that's where we find ourselves, is in this position where we feel like we have to do it all, be everything to everyone around us, which leaves us in a place to neglect ourselves.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the burnout, I think we don't talk about it enough. And when we do talk about burnout, I think people just think that, if I go away to a spa or if I just take this weekend, I'll be better. And burnout is way past going to the spa, right? Like there are some bigger things that you need to be doing to really get, healed from burnout. And I think that people sometimes confuse it with, I'm just feeling stressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's true. And I think there's a lot of hype around burnout. It's a buzzword, right? People talk a lot about it. And you're right. There's a lot of quick fixes, but that doesn't necessarily heal the underlying issue, which is what we really need to get to. So if you go to a spa for a weekend, you feel better, you come back refreshed, chances are you're going to fall back into that same cycle and that pattern of behavior. So I think that's a really good call out. So one thing I also wanted to talk about is this concept of vulnerability. I know you talk a lot about psychological safety at work and empathy in leadership and vulnerability. And similarly, so I think as women, we've been conditioned, don't ask for help. It shows a sign of weakness. Similarly, I think a lot of us, and I'm sure this is true for men too, I think it just applies differently, have been sort of praised for not being emotional, for not showing emotion in the workplace. I can remember many, many, many years ago starting out where it was just something that I, whether it's conscious or subconsciously, did was, void of all emotion, right? To be more like a man. And then so for me to overcome that and realize that no, actually empathy and vulnerability are superpowers and help with connection and leading teams and people. It was a struggle. I'm not going to lie. And so that conditioning and those beliefs that we carry with us for sometimes a lifetime, right? Like years. I know a lot of struggle with that concept of vulnerability. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So I think it goes back to exactly what you just said. Like traditionally, women were able to get promoted into like the C-suite or into those leadership roles because they were mirroring men, the behaviors of a man, and the people who were hiring and promoting were men. And so the psychology behind that, right? Like is that there are biases that we all have. And it's not just men that have biases. It's not one group of people. Every human has biases. And because the people who were in the power and still do have the same power today, even though, whoever you listen to might say otherwise, they still hold the power. There is this whole thing around, I have this way of thinking about what success looks like. And if this is exactly what I believe that success looks like, this is what I did to get here, this is what my predecessor did to get here, then there's a blueprint. So women began to follow that blueprint because it's a tried and true way of getting that promotion. It's a tried and true way of getting to be invited to this club, if you will, this leadership club that if we show something different, unless there is a person who has power and privilege that says, yes, that is okay, then we tend to get left out, right? And so I think it's really a matter of who has the ability to say, it's okay if we show the human sides of ourselves. And it's okay if we are able to talk about the emotions that we experience because we're humans. And it's okay if we make a mistake and have an issue with regulating those emotions, as long as we can come back and say, you know what, I didn't really show up as the best version of myself, and I want to apologize for that. That we are humans, and the more that we can show our humanity, the more engaged our employees will be. Like, that is just psychology. That's just the way that it is. Like, people have to see that they can be themselves and that you're yourself and that you're a human, so that they know that they can make mistakes and that it's not going to lead to disaster or to a horrible negative punishment for them making those mistakes.
Yeah, I think those are incredibly important points. And I love what you said about the blueprint, because I think it is that well-carved path that we feel like we have to follow if we want to be quote unquote successful. So I guess the million-dollar question is, how do we start to create, right, a new blueprint for women in leadership? And that's not to say we can't draw upon things that have worked, but maybe there's some things in there, as you're saying, that aren't really working.
Yeah, I think it comes with experimentation. I think it's also like doing more leadership development around this topic of empathy, connection, vulnerability, all the things, so that people recognize that this is a leadership edge, if you will, like those people who are more emotionally and socially intelligent, which vulnerability is actually a part of that, tend to do better in their corporate lives or just in life in general, because relationships are pretty much the beginning of all success. And if you don't have the ability to really engage with people in a way that makes them feel valued, that makes them feel seen, heard, understood, all of the things that as humans we want, then you will find that you can only go so far in your leadership journey anyway. And so I think that it's about just really helping everyone, not just women, but also the people who hold these leadership positions and are responsible for promoting and things of that sort, to help them understand that being vulnerable and showing connection and really showing empathy are all behaviors that you want to see in a leader. And those are the things that you should be looking for to really bolster the performance of the leaders that you have in your space. So that's what I would say, is just through training and understanding, but also having conversations like this. I think most of the time, we're finding that people are not necessarily able to get into that space of, oh, I can take this training or I can go and do this thing. Like, it should really be like these smaller conversations that we're having when we're no longer at the water cooler, and maybe we will at some point in time get back to that space. But when we're just in these conversations and we're out to dinner or we're in the workplace and we're having team meetings and things of that sort, like this should be a part of those team meetings so that it becomes more of a norm than an outlier.
More embedded into the day-to-day. Yeah, I think that's great. A great point. And so before we started recording, you and I were talking a little bit about high functioning anxiety and definitely pros and cons to that. But many high achievers are focused on the external success. And I can relate to this because this was once where I was. But we tend to neglect our own, not only needs, but our fulfillment.
Yeah.
So I would love to know from your perspective, how can leaders, in particular female leaders, ensure that they're growing in a way that's both externally impactful, because we don't want to lose that, right? We're still ambitious. We want to have impact, but also internally sustainable.
Yeah, I think that is the thing that makes people really stop in their tracks when you start to ask them, like, what brings you fulfillment and joy? I've coached a lot of people, a lot of executives, and a lot of high-powered women executives in particular. And I have had, and what I would say is that most people are able to answer my questions pretty quickly. But when I ask that question, people usually stop and then they look at me as if, like I just asked like the weirdest question ever. And then they can't really answer it because they're just like, oh, well, I don't I haven't really thought about that, right? Like, and why are you thinking about it, or that luxury doesn't come to me, right? Because they see it more as a luxury than something that actually should be a norm. So what I would always say is, number one, I think that no matter what you do in life, it should be fulfilling. Like, I think that there's a way to find fulfillment once you identify what is meaningful to you. So there's the meaning and then there's purpose. And I think that that's where fulfillment comes from. It is engaging in those things that are meaningful and purposeful to you, and that you are always reaching towards your North Star and that you're on that path. So for me, I think that even when I was in corporate America, I had also forgotten that. Like, I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know what that something was. I knew that I felt like I had hit a ceiling figuratively in terms of where I could go and what I could do or what I was interested in doing where I was at that point. And it took me taking time for myself. So there is a space that I always talk about, that silent space that we really need to give ourselves time with, that will allow you to actually get to that understanding of what is fulfilling for me, and am I going toward that North Star? Am I still working toward things that are purposeful and meaningful to me? And if I am not, where am I on that path? Like, am I all the way over here when I should be going this way? Or am I just a little bit off the beaten path and I just need to find my way back? And those are the things that we don't really sit down and think about. Like, for people who might journal and are more introspective, I think they might get it a little bit better. But for people who are constantly in that high achievement mode, constantly like, I did this thing and now I'm going to do this another thing, and then I'm going to do this other thing. Well, the thing that they don't add to their list is, I'm going to look inward and see how I'm doing. That's the part that's always missing when it comes to the high achiever. It's always external, to your point of, what do I need to do next? And it's a lovely check the box. Like, if you look at their little sheet, all the boxes are checked. They're happy in terms of their external gratification. But what I always say is that if you ever have that nagging feeling that you've reached this goal and it feels empty, then you know that you're neglecting yourself and that you need to start turning inward and look and see where you are on your path towards your North Star.
Such incredible advice. And there's so much power in what you just said. I think a couple of things I want to just add to that. I think the pause, or emphasize rather, the pause is really important. We're so busy doing, going, achieving. Taking that step back to pause and reflect and ask yourself those questions, so important. That's also where coaching can be extremely helpful, right? As we know. And I would say that it's hard, and sometimes it can be scary because we've been so singularly focused. It can be scary to even take that step back, because if the answer to the question of, is this fulfilling me? Is this bringing joy? Am I living my purpose? If there's even an ounce of doubt there,
yes,
could be terrifying, right? To admit to myself, not even out loud to anyone else, right? That the answer might be no. And so I think that's incredibly hard. And again, I'll reiterate, I think that's where, whether it's a friend, a therapist, a coach, having someone to work through that with you can be incredibly powerful. So I absolutely love what you just said. Dr. Scott, I know you have a book launching this year. What can you share with us?
Yes. So the book is about connection, which is, I think, is a very important topic that we really need to get back to, especially in this time. And I know that sounds cliche to say, like, oh, in this time, we're really disconnected. But we are really disconnected. I don't know what other words to use and not sound too cliche, but I feel like that there's a psychology of connection that might be missing and that people may not really understand. So the book is really around peace and fulfillment, exactly the things that we're talking about, but it's also around for those people who are really looking to perform at their best. And that may be performance at work, that could be performance just in their personal lives. But when we're thinking about, like, what does success look like, it is all about the psychology of connection. So I think about it in terms of connection to self, connection to others, and connection to that higher self, or some people might call it, higher consciousness, things of that sort. But what I really do believe is that we really need to get to a place where we truly understand ourselves in a deeper way than just like, oh, I like the color red, or this is my favorite food, right? Like, you should know yourself better than any other human knows you. And we don't really take the time to stop. And that's that quiet space that I was talking about, to just understand and reflect and to ask ourselves the hard questions. And I had a coaching client that I thought was fantastic and phenomenal. And she said, I think the reason why I keep going and I don't want to be in that quiet space is because I think it makes me feel depressed, like when I'm there. And so I don't like the way I feel when I'm there. And I think that that is so true for a lot of us, right? We
Sure.
don't like the way that we feel when we're there because we don't take the time to do the work and work through those hard feelings while we're there. And I do think that a coach is always helpful when we're thinking about that, or a therapist. But I think that that's why people stay away from that quiet space sometimes. It's that feeling of either I'm sad, or if I go there, then I have to change my life. And I don't want to change. I'm happy. Change is hard. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I think self is important. When I think about higher self, this is all around mindfulness, intuition, growth, things of that sort that I think are things that take us to that very, very next level of, like, if you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy, it's like all the way up there at an enlightenment. And I know it takes us time to get there. So that to me is always a journey. And then when I think about connection to others, to me, it's really about curated connections and understanding the science of relationships. I think sometimes we look at connection as something that equals friendship or love. And while those two things can be true, they are separate categories than what I am talking about when I say connection. Because real connection can happen with anyone at any point in time. And you can be strangers on a subway or strangers on the street and have a moment of connection, because it's really about being fully present, being fully engaged, and energy between two people, and you and the other person both feel heard and understood and seen. That's what true connection is. So I think that many times we get it confused with friendship or love. And while those things can happen over time, that is not what I mean by connection. And so I think it's just really the psychology of understanding connection and how to use it in a way to stay successful.
I love that. And I'm so excited for your book. I can't wait to read it. So if there's one message you want listeners to take away from today's episode, what would that be?
I would say to really take time to be in that quiet space and find what is most fulfilling and nurturing for you, is to take care of yourself. Take care of yourself, because right now we are in a time where everyone is kind of feeling, a little untethered, if you will. And so if you can really get to that space and go back internal versus focusing externally, I think that we can get back to a time in which people were able to really understand how to get to that space between you and the other person in a way that really feels fulfilling, that really helps you to think about how you can work together versus apart, and to really get to that place of performance that you're looking for. So you can do both. It's not an either or, it's a both and still be successful. But I think the success starts within. And that's my advice to everyone, is to really look within and take that time to just be silent. You don't need to be on social media. You don't need to be watching the news. You don't need to be worried about all of your check the boxes. It's really like, go inside of yourself and see what you're missing, because I'm pretty sure that what you will find will be something that will help you get to that next level that you're looking for.
Such great advice. And I think it's, how do we turn it again? It's not easy, but tuning out that external and tuning into the internal, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So on this show, we talk about success and redefining success. I would love to know, how do you define success for yourself, and maybe how has that evolved for you over time?
Yeah, I think for me, success is being able to be the best version of myself at any given moment throughout my day. and to recognize when I am not the best version of myself and to pour into myself more compassionately and to reframe the mistakes that I make as learning opportunities. So that is truly what I see success as. If I can continuously grow and evolve and continuously think about ways to be the best version of myself each and every day for myself, for my family, for my clients, for everyone, I think that that is successful to me.
Beautifully stated. Dr. Scott, where can our listeners learn more about you and the work that you do?
Yes, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. I love interacting with new people all the time, so you can DM me anytime on LinkedIn. You can also find me at www.serenityscihealth.com. So that's psyhealth.com.
Perfect. I want to thank you so much for being here, for sharing your insights and expertise. Truly love the work that you're doing and the light that you're shining in the world. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a true pleasure.
And of course, you can visit my website at gialacqua.com, reach out on Instagram at gialacqua. Let us know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. This is Gia signing off with gratitude for your time and energy. Our mic drops, but the movement continues. Until next time, your next chapter is waiting. Take care.
That concludes another empowering episode of Your Future Starts Now. Before we wrap up, I want to thank this incredible community of high-achieving women. Your energy, resilience, and commitment to growth are the driving force behind what we do. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate it, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower high-achieving women just like you. And of course, share Your Future Starts Now with the extraordinary women in your life who are also on a journey of healing and empowerment. Connect with us on social media, share your thoughts, let us know what topics you'd like to explore in future episodes. Stay connected on Instagram at gialacqua. I encourage you to carry the energy of this conversation into your day and keep on supporting the incredible women around you. Until next time, remember, your next chapter is waiting.